Welcome to Count Me In. I'm your host, Adam Larson. Today, I'm thrilled to sit down with Dr. Todd Thornock, Associate Professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Academic Research Fellow at IMA. In our chat, Todd explains why we're people first, even in the accounting world built on structure and numbers. He breaks down how personality shapes decision making, reveals the unexpected positives of traits like physiological entitlement, and shares practical strategies for managers looking to get the best out of their teams. Todd also speaks candidly about how personal experience drives his approach to leadership and why curiosity and servant leadership matter more than ever. Whether you lead a team or just want new ideas for building a better workplace, there's something here for you. Let's get started. Well, Todd, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today. And the reason I wanted you to come on is at our conference just a little over a month ago, you spoke about people power, the art of understanding and motivating your team. And it's a conversation that comes up a lot, especially when I'm talking with different individuals, talking about cultures, talking about leadership. But you come with a very unique perspective of you have a lot of the research side and the academic thought process behind a lot of these things that people go through. We're all accountants, we're accountants who are listening to this podcast. But one thing you just said just before we started recording, you said we're people first. And maybe we could just start there. We're people first. And what kind of got you interested in looking into this topic?
Well, it's such an interesting thing. I'm going to step back just a touch because I'm such an accountant. High school,
Yeah.
I loved the order of things, and my brother and mom were accountants, and so I thought, oh, I'm going to do accounting until I don't like it. I just loved the debits and credits, the order, the structure, the correctness of a lot of parts of accounting. But as I got more and more into it, I realized accounting isn't just that. Those are some tools we use, but accounting is more about communication, about people, about having someone on either end. And as I decided to get into research and do my PhD, it was the psychological side of accounting and decision making that started to grab my interest and really pull me into, the studies that I was going to partake in. And it naturally drew me to these differences in individuals. And we are people first. And my advisor had a quote in a discussion that he did, that organizations don't make decisions, people do. And that those decisions are going to be formed by I'm slaughtering the quote, but they're going to be formed by the personalities of those people. So that's it, all of those decisions are informed by who we are as individuals, as people first. And so for me, it's been a very natural progression, but I don't think I saw that in practice when I was in public accounting, or even if I had gone to practice. I don't know if I would have made that connection of how important people and personality is to accounting and decisions that we make within organizations.
And I can just imagine like somebody listening to this podcast and saying, wait, what about personalities and people for decision making? Because when you're hiring somebody or you're looking to build your team, you're always looking at, will this person fit? Do they have the skills that work? But in that, making sure that person fits, that's looking at their personality and looking at how they interact with you and how they might interact with the team. What are some things that people should start keeping in mind when they're thinking about personalities? Because it's, when you say the word personality, maybe we can start by what do you mean by that? Because it's like, 'cause somebody might say personality and say, okay, well, that person is nice to me. That's their personality, but it means so much more than that.
But yeah, personality has we have our connotations to them. Usually when you say, "Oh, that person's a personality," well,
Yeah.
then you're like, "Okay, well, they're gonna be very unique or whatever." Well, we're all
Yeah.
unique, and we have a combination. We're formed of a combination of personal characteristics. We have obviously those immutable characteristics, but really the personality as defined when we talk about it from a research or very specific side is these are dispositional characteristics of an individual. How do we
Hmm.
think and feel? These are usually enduring, stable type traits that don't go anywhere, and these influence how we perceive situations, maybe how we adapt to things, adapt to challenges, and ultimately how we behave. So, I might care a lot about something specific, and that is driven by a personality characteristic. Now, these constitute ourselves, these qualities and characteristics, a combination of them will constitute who we are. We might have one personality characteristic, and we have another one that might help offset certain things. I shared at the talk a month ago at the conference that I'm relatively high in psychological entitlement, And if I go walk around saying, "Hey, I'm entitled," I mean, it sounds really funny, but when I think about I have other characteristics that might help offset some of the negative sides of entitlement, maybe,
Mhm.
but we're a combination, and so it's really hard to look at somebody and say, "I know exactly who they are." But there are certain traits that we can detect that have consistent that interact with the environment in a very consistent manner. And so when we're meeting people, we're getting to know them. Yes, I think one of the key things, and maybe the question that you were asking was, well, what can we do? I think being open and curious, being
Mhm.
aware is probably one of the biggest ways. Oh, I'm coming into a situation I'm interacting with someone I may or may not know. Let me be a little curious about who this individual is. Let me observe. And I know that's not natural for me. It's something I've had to learn over a lot of time, but that is one of the things to be aware. And differences in people do not create problems, really. We talk about fit when we're hiring, but fit comes in a lot of different manners. Is that fit meaning they're similar to other people on the team, or is that fit meaning they bring a certain skill set that the team actually needs that doesn't currently have? Both of those could
Mhm.
be considered fit depending on the goals or what the objective is. And so being aware of that is important. And what I think often we're not very informed, I guess, on the benefits of different personalities. I think there might be a natural tendency to get to the negative side of certain personality characteristics that we do observe because
Mhm.
research has shown that we are actually really good observers of personality, especially the outwardly expressed ones. I mean, we're
Yeah.
very good at it as human beings. But do we know what the good sides are and the bad? And that was something that's driven some of my researches. I'm like, I know this has got a negative side to it, but what about the positive sides? And really digging into that.
So it's interesting you say the positive and negative sides because you mentioned about you said entitlement, academic entitlement. Like you have this sorry, the wording you use,
Psychological, yeah,
psychological entitlement. It's interesting, but you say that because when somebody says the word entitlement, somebody thinks that person thinks so highly of themselves. I don't want to deal with them, or like you automatically go to the negative side of that.
absolutely.
But
And I
there's
think
also positive sides, right?
and that yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about entitlement. So entitlement, I
Yeah.
have a friend who does research in this in personality and did has started way before that. And I was sitting at a conference listening to this. This was right after I had graduated. I'd done a lot of research on performance feedback, something I find really interesting for a number of reasons. And he brought up the fact that, one of the subtraits of narcissism is psychological entitlement, and that something he said linked that to feedback, that they might be different in how they receive and respond to performance feedback. And that really struck me as, oh, I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. And so as I dug into psychological entitlement, we often think about the entitled generation. It's all about me, me, me. It's the me generation. I think the millennial generation was the first one where entitlement was supposed to be like you know, one of those characteristics that seemed to be different than other generations. And as we dug into it, psychological entitlement is a little bit more common than we think. It's the believing that we deserve more just because of who we are, right? So
Mhm.
that could be an entitlement like it's not the deserving, like I did something, therefore I'm entitled to receive. That's kind of transactional and very understanding. This is more, I'm of value. I think I should get something because I'm just who I am. And that has its both positive and negative sides. But it's when you think you can deserve something regardless of your actions in a work environment, that can have some really, really critical tensions. So, one of our
Yeah.
studies, we looked at that side of things where people could self report their performance. And we found individuals that were higher in entitlement, unsurprisingly, overreported more, and that means that they got paid more, and it wasn't because they were necessarily lying, they just gave themselves the benefit of the doubt when they were evaluating their performance in a way that was, you know, a bit selfish, to be honest, and so there's that negative side for sure that can manifest in a lot of ways, and we also have seen other things with psychological entitlement where they don't necessarily have as much respect for their peers, they think themselves above their peers. And so our first study we looked at was performance feedback and entitlement. And we found that for feedback provided by a peer, that the psychologically entitled, the higher you were in that, the less you responded to that negative feedback. We focused primarily on negative feedback because that's one of the harder things to give is you didn't perform as high as your expectations or the goal or benchmark, not negative like being mean or anything, just saying, here's the benchmark, you performed lower than that. And we found that with the peer feedback provider, the high psychologically entitled responded very poorly to that versus the low psychologically entitled who actually responded really well to a peer. The flip side of that was a more authoritative supervisor like feedback provider. That's where the pattern actually flipped entirely. The high psychologically entitled responded way better, worked a lot harder, improved performance more versus the low psychologically entitled. And we argued and had some evidence that this had to do with psychologically entitled individuals' views of their peers, that they felt superior to them, that they also have and this kind of led to our second study. They cared about how they were viewed in the eyes of superiors, a little bit of
Yeah.
ingratiation.
It's interesting, like you saying that, where the psychological entitlement, there's that when a peer gives you feedback, you're not more apt to hear those things. But sometimes the peer is probably the most valuable feedback because they're the one doing the same work or doing similar work to you that they can really give you that feedback. And I wonder why that is. Why is it that we have, and whether you're I wonder if we all have a little bit of that psychological entitlement in us because when somebody who's a peer gives you feedback, it depends on the day. Like
Yeah.
I'm reflecting myself. It depends on the day. If I've had a really rough day and somebody and a peer's come to me saying, you did this, and and that's all how they deliver it, all that stuff. But if a peer comes and gives me feedback, on some days I'll be like, oh yeah, thank you. This is great. Like I can really improve upon myself. But then other days it's like, "Ah, why are you talking to me? How do you feel?" Like suddenly you have this emotion and it all like, so why do you think that is? Why do you think there's that up and down so much with those?
Well, that's a really great point, and this is veering a little bit off of my research, but I think from what I've
Okay.
kind of garnered, and that's okay because this is a discussion. I don't need to be an expert to my academic peers. But I've seen a lot. And when it
Yeah.
comes to how we respond to peer feedback, I think a lot of it depends because it depends on the day. There are so many other factors that come into it. It's not just the source telling us something negative,
Mhm.
but it's also, well, what does that mean in the context of how our project is going? Or what about will the manager see? Or uh, do I have rapport with this one? Have they given me positive feedback in the past? Is to balance that out, do I trust the individual? Trust is one of those things, especially for peer feedback that I've noticed
Mhm.
is often really important. I get negative feedback regularly. I'm gonna use like my wife gives me negative feedback. "Hey, here's something that we expect. You're here." And she's very but sh hey, there's trust. There's a level of trust. And so while it might not be fun to hear it, I also am much more willing to incorporate it to do something different in our family organization. And I would say
Yeah.
that mirror is there in a, a for profit or even just really any other kind of organization. I don't think profit is the only thing there, but if there's that level of trust with that peer and that trust can be built up in a lot of ways, then
Mhm.
I think we can get to respond more consistently and better. But yeah, a lot of factors, Adam. I think that that's a really interesting thing. One thing I failed to mention with the good sides, and this one blew us away when we were doing the second
Yeah.
study. And I kind of alluded to it a little bit where high psychologically entitled misreported more and worked less when they could self-report and there was no evidence that would ever be seen. We had them like filling out mazes. So I know this is kind of funny, but we do this in experiment for control. We hired them, we paid them for every maze that they completed. Better put, we paid them for every maze they said they completed correctly. And so they had to fill out the mazes and then put the number into the computer. And there are a lot of work environments where we can't verify performance. We have to rely on some self-reports that someone did something. Whether they did it right or not may come to light at some point and it may not. And so in one of the conditions, there was no evidence that these maze packets would ever be looked at. And so all we were going to do is we were going to pay them based on what they reported and not there's no deception or anything associated with that. And that's where we found that initial finding, and that is consistent with the personality. Personality is I deserve more just because of who I am. Therefore, I'm
Mhm.
either going to cheat or give myself the benefit of the doubt when it's kind of hazy, or maybe not be as careful when I'm auditing myself. There are a lot of different ways that that can manifest, and we show a little bit of all of it. But the flip side, and this blew us away, is once we introduced for the other conditions, it's just subtle monitoring. we said these packets will be looked at some point in the future. And there were no markings on the packets to say this is, Joe or Jane's or whatever their packet. So there's no like interaction there. I mean, these were students and they kind of knew who we were as professors, but they weren't our students. And so
Mhm.
maybe we'd see them in the building or whatever. So there's no real reason for them to care except for this is one of the personality traits, like subtraits within a psychological entitlement. It's called sociotropy. They have a desire to be seen well by others, for
Mhm.
others to think well of them. And I think about that and go, "Oh, yeah, I have that probably in spades, maybe a little too much, where I do some things to be seen,
Mhm.
but that motivates me." And so predicted that it would just kind of reduce psychological entitlement's desire to get more without the work, right? And what we ended up finding was it not only reduced it, but their misreporting dropped to extremely low levels below the low psychologically entitled group. They
Wow.
continued to misreport about the same level. And remember, that's not just stealing, that's also just being wrong, not auditing yourself very well. But they
Yeah.
were extremely careful. Their misreporting dropped, and their actual true performance, how many of these mazes they completed properly, went above the low psychologically entitled. So not only did it just kind of like reduce the bad, it actually magnified a good within that personality trait to respond with greater effort and diligence when there's some level of accountability. Now, this isn't like harsh oversight, and we're very careful because there is research that shows that psychologically entitled actually do buck at authority, kind of like looking down on them and but it was just more accountability. You know what? We're going to be looking at this at some point in the future. There was no penalty attached to it, no anything. It was just your work will be visible to other people. And we found that not only reduced the bad, but like manifested a really important trait of psychologically entitled that if managers can access that trait, their performance is going to be higher in pursuing your goals and objectives of the firm. So that one blew us away. The first one was like, oh, that's kind of understandable with feedback and
Yeah.
peers and stuff. But this one really surprised us. We were not expecting that.
Yeah, that it shows the positive side of the psychological entitlement because we all have an element of it, and how can you respond to it as a manager, even just like just that little bit of accountability? Because as you said, when somebody had like when you get to that micromanager level of accountability, a lot of us kind of buck at that because
Yeah.
it's not a fun environment to be on. It's not collaborative, and you're spending all your time just updating your boss on things and not actually getting work done. But that low level accountability, because what I was thinking when you first started talking, I was like, well, are there positive benefits? And then as you were chatting, of course, you kind of show those positive benefits, and it's kind of got me thinking where how can we help understand the personalities of the people who we work with a little bit better, like because there's all those tests, like those personalities tests, but those are cookie cutter, put you in some sort of a box, and I don't know that those are the best form of finding that out.
And honestly, when people are filling those out, they also know that they're being monitored. And so
Of
if I'm in
course.
a screening, because a lot of firms do screening personality tests, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, how accurate are they if I know that I'm going to be evaluated and maybe assigned on teams based on one thing or another? And it can be turned into a game of some sort. That is one way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's a legitimate way, and especially those who are in the market of selling those kind of assessment products are very cognizant of a lot of that. I'm a little more skeptical as an academic, but at the same time, what ways do we have? That's a great question, and so I've done quite a bit of just kind of looking into it. So these kind of
Mhm.
screening tools are used. There's a lot of them that get at some personality characteristics or others. In the academic world, we have these metrics that can be used. But again, if they're linked with employment, are people going to be as honest with that? And so these self reports for personality can have their downsides. There's no doubt about it. They are surprisingly robust when you look at broadly, but once you bring it into an organizational environment, they might not be as accurate. Some of the things that we've thought about, because we had to think about this a lot in our research, we often get, well, how is this applicable? Like you found
Mhm.
this thing in a lab. Okay, great. Well, how is this useful for managers? And so we've been thinking about this since that first paper 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, how are we able to figure out personality? I think the step one, and we talked a little bit about it offline, this idea for being curious, right? We need to
Yeah.
be open and aware. Be aware of people is what I said. And that requires a little bit of curiosity, pulling back a bit on judgment, which is hard to do in a very corporate, goal-centered, high speed, high pay, the fast-paced world, to kind of step back and go, how can I understand my people? Like, what are some ways that I can understand who they are? And that requires a little bit of self-reflection. So if you don't want to
Yeah.
understand yourself, why would you want to understand another individual? And this is something that I've learned over the last 5 or 6 years. Like, I start to understand my people, the people I'm around, whether I'm supervising them or working with them or not, understand them better as I come to understand myself better. So probably step number 1 is being curious, kind of at the self level first, withholding some judgment. It doesn't mean that we can't make judgments about behavior, but I think just putting on pause all of our preconceived notions, I would say, of who people are, maybe even putting aside some of our preconceived negative parts of personality traits. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But, we do have an ability, like research has shown that humans are very good at detecting personalities that are very outwardly expressed. Like the
Yeah.
inwardly expressed personality variables, those are a lot harder to get out from just interacting with somebody. But I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast knows that they can pick out a situation where they've met somebody for the first time and within 30 seconds or less, whether that's through body language, through some of the words they say, certain personality characteristics start to manifest, right? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
those are not inaccurate assessments of personality. And they might not be perfect. I mean, we don't, that the first impressions, because that's kind of a first impression thing, those typically are more accurate than we give them credit for. Although I would say not 100% accurate. So you always got to be a little bit careful with that. But it is a way that we can start detecting personality and personality traits. And if I ever got a sense that I have an entitled employee, I would try to take the lessons I've learned on that to go, okay, how can I use the lessons I've learned to help get the most out of this employee? There might be some negative sides for it that are not suitable for the job, and that, I mean, of course, in trying to find the right fit, we'd have to consider that as well. So
Hmm.
it's something else that. So how else do we see these things? So I think we can observe these things. This really hit home, and I shared a story. It wasn't planned, but when I was doing the talk at the conference, it clicked to me that it's something about my son. So there's a quote that I shared. It says, "How knoweth a man the master whom he has not served, and who is a stranger unto him, and is far from the thoughts and intents of his heart?" So, how do we know an individual that we haven't served? So, this really hit home to me about 8 years ago. I changed jobs. I moved from Iowa State University to University of Nebraska, and we had just bought our dream home in Iowa, and we couldn't sell it right away. So it's about a little over 3-hour drive between the two. My oldest son was about to enter high school, and it just made sense for us to find an apartment in Lincoln, Nebraska. And during the week, we'd live together, and he'd go to school, and I'd do my job. And then on the weekend, we'd go back home to the rest of my family. So a little bit more backstory. This is my oldest son at the time. He was 15 or so, and I never connected well with my son. I mean, just frankly, I didn't understand him. We actually didn't know this, but until right about that time, but he was autistic, high functioning autistic. We could never figure it out as new parents why things were a little bit different for our son. And after talking to some professionals, we were able to officially get the diagnosis that made everything click. Now, autism is not exactly personality, but any of the listeners know, and any of you guys that know an autistic individual, there are characteristics that are similar across
Hmm.
autistic individuals. And, my son is very high functioning. He lives on his own now. He's 23. He lives on his own, but there are a lot of characteristics of his personality that are there. And for me, and this was really something I needed. I needed that year of just me and him
Hmm.
working together, serving together. I made food for him. I made sure he had all of his school appointments done. I was the sole provider for my son, who I did not understand his personality at all. I mean, I knew him as my child, but not
Hmm.
some of these deeper characteristics that if if I knew then or before then what I know now about autism, how much better of a father could I have been? How could I have done better? And I am not doing that to, beat myself up, but that opportunity to serve him for a year helped me understand my son and be able to help him get the most out of this life that is very difficult for autistic individuals. And so that connection of serving our people and getting to know them through that service can then help us better be able to get the most out of who they are as individuals. And so, yeah, that changed my life, and I never would have seen it happen. And it's a big deal that we get to know the people by serving them, and that's where servant leadership comes in. That's not the point of this podcast, but I
Hmm.
think we get to know people as we serve them.
I appreciate you sharing that story because there's a lot of elements to that when you apply it to the workplace, it's hugely important because a lot of times we work with people, so we're side by side with them, but we don't ever actually take the time to get to know them. We don't take the time to understand them in a lot of ways, and I think that's why it's so important to have activities that maybe are not work focused, to have times where you kind of have that personable side because unless you have that personal connection, can't really it's hard to build trust with people. It's hard to move beyond just the straight, I'm just doing these things to meet these numbers and to meet our bottom line and that's it. But like we said when we first started the podcast, we're humans first before we become accountants. We're humans first before we become somebody's employee, before we become somebody's boss. And remembering that and being curious seems like it seems like it's an important aspect of leadership that is not always taught. Like you teach it, like if you learn about servant leadership, you kind of hear about it from that side of things. But when you're looking at typical leadership courses, they don't say, "Hey, sit down and get to know your people and serve them a little bit." And when you say serve them, maybe you could talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
I think that's a great point. And at the outset, it's something I'm very aware of when we are in these environments where we have goals that we have to meet and we're trying to achieve the objectives of the organization. Those can be, I mean, those are the driving force for why we get together.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying put those aside completely to just get to know people and become friends with everybody, because that's not going to be the case. There are a lot of people that we just won't be friends with. But the point is trying to figure out who these individuals are, being open to that. Maybe you become friends, maybe you don't, but if you can understand where they're coming from, you'll have a better idea of how to get the most out of them, how to help them have
yeah.
a better experience. And it's not just trying to use our employees, but trying to get the most out of them in these organizational settings. So when you said on the serving side, these can come in lots of different ways. I mean, obviously, a parent-child serving that service between a parent and child are very different than employees. But I think what you're saying is openness to other people, seeing people
Hmm.
for who they are. That is so simple to just ask them a question. Be kind of outside of yourself. And there are you know, a lot of tips and tricks to how to do this. It comes more naturally to some than others. And it could just be in the little things, right?
Hmm.
You see that somebody needs help with something and you just go, "Hey, let's help them out." And I service comes in a lot of different ways. I think where it starts is just being mindful of others.
Hmm.
Being mindful, just being outside. I'm often in my own head and I'm walking and doing my thing, whether it's, in the morning trying to get ready for the day or otherwise. But it's just stopping for a second and being a little outside yourself to go, "Oh, okay, there are others around me. What can I do?" And I think there's small things. Some people that comes very natural, some it doesn't. It's not the only way to get to know your people, but it is a very quick way. And so I think servant leaders come in a lot of different ways. You got to get the leadership job done. There are objectives and goals, but along the way, what are those characteristics that you're demonstrating to get to know others? And I think it's more of a mindset. I would call
Hmm.
most of that the serving side of mindset, because if you're aware of other people, you are going to see where their needs are. And it doesn't mean your needs can't be met, because that awareness doesn't have to be 100% of the time. That awareness can be, you know what? I'm going to take a little bit of time to just think about my team and think I mean, I don't even have to spend that much, but let me think through each individual And there have been times where that has been super helpful in organizations I've worked in, of just taking time and let's talk about each individual, not very long, not gossipy, just what are their needs? What are they doing? What can we do to help? And that might
Hmm.
be, that's an awareness that is not a time consuming awareness. That's just being
Yeah.
deliberate and intentional about thinking about your people. And through that, you'll be able to have those opportunities to serve and get to know them better.
Well, and if you find if you do those activities and you're successful at kind of being aware and being mindful of the people around you and the people you work with, and it ultimately will affect your bottom line because people will be more helpful. They'll be more satisfied in their job. They'll be more excited and more engaged because they're connecting with folks and they have the proper motivation, because that's
Motivation.
the hardest thing, is getting that proper motivation, because there's so many aspects of our jobs and our lives that are happening that affect how we do our daily job. And so making it an easier transition for people, because we have a lot of things that we deal with outside of work. And when you come to work, there's more things you have to deal with, and so being able to balance all those things in a proper way allows us to be better employees, it seems.
Yeah. At the outset of this, of understanding and motivating your people, the point is every organization has strategies and goals that need to be achieved. If it's a
Yeah.
for-profit entity, that's making the shareholders happy, right? That's making the sale. It's doing all of those things that are really important. And if it's a not-for-profit entity, there's still constituents that need the services or whatever's being provided. So whatever organization you're a part of, there are goals that need to be achieved, and those need to be achieved through effort, coordination, all of these things that we do, as no organization is, by organization, depends on how you define it, but it's going to be made up of more than one person. So then you have different values and objectives and goals that need to be brought in unison. As management accountants, we're particularly good at helping develop control systems, tools, and other things that help bring those incentives, align those values close enough together to be able to get the job done. And so, yeah, that drives a lot of what we're doing. But then once we're in that space, what more can we do to amplify that motivation to achieve those objectives? How can we achieve more together? And it's often maybe taking a step and thinking about these personality elements, that what each of us bring to the table as unique individuals, who are a complex combination of personalities together, and we're trying to come together to meet a greater purpose. It's actually a really beautiful thing when you step back, but it comes with a ton of work. It really does. And maybe the first step, that is in my observation, the hardest, is just that awareness of other people, just taking that little bit of time to be curious and aware. Not that much, and for me, who that's not natural, I actually schedule it in. So I actually take time to go, "This is my
Hmm.
structure. I need to stop and think about this in my family organization, at church, at my co-authors, my
Yeah.
students," those things. I take time to stop and think about that, but I often have to book it, but just 'cause I'm too busy working on the other things that need to be
Yeah, I like that. Well, Todd, this has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you
done.
coming and sharing
Well,
with our audience today, and it's been wonderful, and I will definitely got to have you back as you do more research and we have more chats.
anytime. I mean, this just scratches the surface of a lot of things that we're interested in. And as a researcher, I'm always interested in what people are seeing. What those
Hmm.
who are out there, what are they seeing? I asked questions of the group a month ago at the conference and got some really interesting insights about other things. I feel quite blessed that I can, I teach my students, but my ability to go and just spend time thinking about this, it's a privileged position I get to be in, to do research and to think about this. And I feel a strong obligation to be able to turn around and talk about it, to go, okay, what does this mean for the real world, for people who are having to live and make decisions in the real life, where I get to kind of hang out in my little privileged seclusion, call it the ivory tower a little bit, but I don't like it up there by myself too long. I like talking about it. So anytime you want me there to talk about these things, I really appreciate it. And any of the listeners, if they have any questions, is there a way that, they can always look me up, reach out to me
Check
directly if
the
they have any thoughts?
Yep. Check the link in the podcast notes. You can connect with Todd on LinkedIn or anywhere else.
Because I love talking and continuing this conversation with anyone who's really interested in what we found and how to apply it. I'd love to help. So thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.